Alright, now we've seen how to create a custom workspace here inside of Photoshop, so let's talk about now how to customize our menus and our keyboard shortcuts as well. Now if I come up here to the window menu, and you'll notice that all of these different color bars here inside of this window menu, and what this is little highlights that they've added in here because I built that previous workspace, that custom workspace we just created. All of these are built off of that image analysis image workspace. And what this allows you to do is create little highlights in here that highlight specific menu items that you will use that are specific to that particular workspace that you created. So what you want to do is create these little highlight icons in every single one of your window menus so that you have these so that you can quickly access different things that you use for different workspaces. So this is something that is very useful as well. So we're going to see now how to create these different types of highlights here, and also how to create custom keyboard shortcuts to work along with this. So I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to change the workspace back to the default workspace, and you'll notice here that all of those highlights are now gone. So now let's go ahead and start building up our own keyboard shortcuts and menu items so that we can see exactly how that was done. Let's go ahead now, we'll choose Edit. We'll come down here and choose Keyboard Shortcuts. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how to view the current keyboard shortcuts you have. So go ahead and toggle open the File menu, and you'll notice inside of the File menu, which is located in the Application menus here inside of the shortcuts, what you're going to do is take a look at this, and you'll notice that all of the keyboard shortcuts for that particular menu are lined out there for you on the right hand side. For instance, create a new document is Control-N, or on the Mac that would be Command-N. For open it would be Control-O, or on the Mac it would be Command-O. So anytime you see the Control key listed here, if you're on a Macintosh, that would be the Command key. Anytime you see the Alt key, that's going to be your Option key. So just remember that when you're working with keyboard shortcuts between different platforms. Control is Command and Alt is Option. That's just the basic crossover keyboard shortcuts that you need to know when working between Mac and PC. Now you'll also notice that listed here under the File menu, all of these options here, if you are working on a Macintosh, you would notice that all of these were under the Photoshop menu, not the File menu. So on the Macintosh side, you have that Photoshop menu, which contains all of the new, open, browse, open as, and different options, as you would see on the Windows side under the File menu. So just remember that some of these options are stored in different places on the operating system, but they're all still there, and all of the keyboard shortcuts should be the same. You just have to remember those crossovers with the Option and Alt key and different things like that. Now, if you wanted to customize your keyboard shortcuts, it's very easy to do so. You could simply click right there next to a keyboard shortcut, and then you could just type in any type of modifier key and or letter key to assign a keyboard shortcut to that particular command. So for instance, if I wanted to assign a keyboard shortcut to Open as Smart Object, I could go ahead then and just type one in. So let's go ahead and type one in now. Alt, Shift, Control, and O. Now you notice there that that's going to come up with a warning that says Alt, Shift, Control, O is already in use and will be removed from File Open As. So I don't really want to override that necessarily because I don't want to get rid of the functionality of that particular keyboard shortcut. So that's one of the challenges when customizing your own keyboard shortcuts, is actually finding a keyboard shortcut that's not assigned to anything, because with all of the different things that Photoshop can do, they have mapped out keyboard shortcuts for almost everything inside of this program. However you can do so, you're going to have to throw in some F keys and things like that, but for the most part it's going to be a little bit difficult to make your keyboard shortcuts seem very functional with like letters and things like that. So you couldn't actually assign Control-O or Command-O to Open as Smart Object simply because it's already assigned somewhere else. Now you can override those options, as I said. I really wouldn't recommend doing that simply because I like to have that original functionality built in and then add my own. So you can override them. Like I said, I really don't suggest that you do that simply because for functional reasons, and also because if you accidentally saved over those defaults, then you wouldn't have those keyboard shortcuts built into the program later on if you needed them. The last thing I'm going to show you here is actually how to assign a keyboard shortcut, and we actually are going to override one of the main keyboard shortcuts here inside of Photoshop simply because it makes the actual event that you're doing with that keyboard shortcut a little bit more functional. So let's go ahead and we'll close up the File menu here, and we're going to come down here and toggle open the Layer menu. And what we want to do here is we want to scroll down until we see the adjustment layers here inside of the layer menu. So we'll look here and we'll say new adjustment layers and levels and curves. These are the two that we're going to take a look at here, the levels and curves adjustment layers. Now, if you don't know what levels and curves do, they adjust tonality of images, and we're going to be getting into exactly how they do that in the image adjustments chapter here in a little bit later on. But I'm going to go ahead now and assign keyboard shortcuts to these that make these a little bit more functional, because there's two ways to use levels and curves. You can use them as static adjustments, or you can use them as adjustment layers. And static adjustments make pixel level modifications to these images that you're working with inside of Photoshop, and they can't be tweaked later on. For instance, if you wanted to make a curves adjustment to an image and then later go back in and adjust the tonal curve that you created, you wouldn't be able to do so with the static image adjustment command. I'm going to suggest that you change these keyboard shortcuts to fit the adjustment layers so that you can use those as a more versatile part of your workflow. So let's go ahead now. I'm going to assign Control M, or on the Mac Command M, to curves, and it's going to come up and warn me that this is going to be removed from image adjustment curves if accepted. That's totally okay with me because I don't like using that static change. So anytime that I use Control M now or Command M on the Mac, it's going to automatically use that as an adjustment layer rather than that static change. I'm going to do the exact same thing for levels here. I'm going to type in Control L, or on the Mac it would be Command L. And this is going to override that original image adjustment levels command if accepted. That's totally okay with me. As I said before, we're going to make sure that we're always working non-destructively on our images, and this is just an easier way to do so. So once you have that set up, now come up here and we're going to click this button right up here, this little disk icon with an arrow beside it. And what that's going to do is allow us to save this set of keyboard shortcuts. So what we're going to do is we're going to call this adjustments here, and it's going to be saved as a .kys file, which stands for keyboard shortcuts. And we'll go ahead then and click save, and now anytime we need this particular set of keyboard shortcuts, we can get to it, but we can also get back to our defaults simply by going up under this menu and choosing Photoshop defaults. And that, as you see there, overrides those levels and curves adjustments that we just made there. But if you needed to get back to that, you simply switch back to your new set of keyboard shortcuts you created, and there is your Control L and Control M for creating those adjustment layers. So that's essentially how you create your own keyboard shortcuts and save them as an alternate set. Always save them as an alternate set, simply because you don't want to override those Photoshop defaults. Now next, let's take a look at the menus. Here in this little tab up here at the top, go ahead and click Menus, and we're going to show you how to go ahead and create custom menus. And what I mean by that is that you can control different aspects of the items that you see here in the menus themselves. And you can also control the highlights like I showed you before. So for instance, if you want to come up under the filter menu here, and let's say for instance that all the time we use the filter blur, Gaussian blur filter. So let's go ahead and find that underneath here. Here's blur, and there's Gaussian blur. Since we use this a lot, especially when we're enhancing photography, we use this for special effects, we use this to smooth skin tones, different things like that. Let's go ahead then and we'll click right here and we'll assign a color to that. So we'll select yellow for that, a nice bright yellow. And now anytime that I go up under that menu, the Gaussian blur filter will automatically be highlighted in yellow and will make it a lot easier to get to anytime I need to do so. Now, the same is true for anything that you don't want to see. If you don't use something very often and you want to hide that from view when you're working inside of the menus, you can do that simply by toggling on and off these eyeball icons here on the left hand side. So for instance, I don't necessarily use the average or the blur more features here, so I'm just going to turn those off simply by clicking these little eyeballs right there. And now whenever I go up underneath the filter and blur menus, I will not see those in there anymore. They're still a part of Photoshop. They're still in there. They're just hidden from view because I feel like they take up a little bit too much space, and because I don't use them very much, so I really don't need to see those each and every time I open up that menu. Now the same is true for menus as is for keyboard shortcuts. You don't need to save over your Photoshop defaults. So go ahead now, come up here and click on this little disk icon again with the arrow. Go ahead and click that, and we'll save these as filters, like so. And we'll go ahead then and we'll click save, and now anytime we need to get to those, they're right up here underneath our menus sets, and anytime we need to switch to those, we just choose filters underneath there. And if we wanted to get back to our Photoshop defaults, we simply click back to our Photoshop defaults, and we're ready to go with the exact same settings that we had when we first opened Photoshop. Now when you're finished creating your custom keyboard shortcuts and menus, go ahead and click OK. All of your changes are now saved inside of Photoshop, and you're ready to continue working.